we're going to start talking about the midpoint formula. And so I can use the midpoint formula to find the midpoint of a segment and any missing endpoints. So what do you think about when you hear the word midpoint? When you think about midpoint, what do you guys think? What does that remind you of? Midpoint. What are you thinking? Abby, what do you think of when you hear midpoint? The middle. And that's exactly what midpoint is. Midpoint is the middle. It's the middle of 2 points in our case. So we're going to be able to find the midpoint, the middle of 2 points, and then you're also going to be able to find an endpoint if you're given the midpoint and an endpoint. Okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about today. So just a little warm-up real quick, but we'll do this together. It says find the average of each set. So average, who knows what average is? Who can tell me what average means? Another word for it is mean. Daniel, what is average? What do you do? So you add them all up and you divide by the total. And that's how you find the middle. So the average helps you find the middle. And you're going to be using that concept for the midpoint as well. So if you do this one here, 4 plus 11 plus 7 plus 4, what do you divide it by? 4. Okay, go ahead and get that into your calculators real quick and see what you get out. Helena, when you're ready, go ahead and tell me what you got. Yes, you may. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You are so welcome.
Sure.
What'd you get?
6.5.
Yeah, so you get 26 over 4, which is 6.5. So that is the center of that. All right. Morgan, do the second one for me, and when you're ready, you can tell me what you got. So 16 over 3, which is 5 1/3, because it's probably 5.3. Repeat it, right? So that's 5 1/3. Okay, Carmichael, help me with number 3. What do we divide it by? What would we divide 5 plus 8 by?
2.
2. Okay, tell me what you get when you're done with that one. Do you need a calculator? What'd you get?
6.5.
6.5, okay. And Gabe, go ahead and help me with the last one there. What do you get?
5.
Yeah, 1 plus 9, you divided it by, because there's 2 pieces, and you get 5. All right, what questions do you guys have on finding the average? Because we're going to be using this concept today with the midpoint. Any questions so far? All right, then. So finding the midpoint on just a number line, meaning there's a single variable, it's not an ordered pair. So the exact middle point between two values is called the midpoint. So that's very important. Somebody, can't remember who told me at the beginning of class, I think it was Abby. Abby said she thinks of middle, right, when you hear the word midpoint, and that's exactly what that is. So to find the midpoint, you add the 2 points together, and you divide them by 2. Because there's 2 points. So that's all that's saying there is add the 2 points together and divide them by 2. Okay, Greg, what is the point for D and E? What is the point for D and what is the point for E?
D is 1, E is 3.
So D equals 1, E equals 3. So, Greg, what would you have to do to find the midpoint of that? 1 plus 3 divided by 2, which equals?
2.
Yeah, 4 divided by 2 is 2. And that makes sense. If you look at D and E, if you go 1 away from D and 1 away from E, that's the exact middle, right? It has the even amount on both sides. You guys see that? Okay, Hayden, what are my points for A and C?
-4 and 0.
Okay? So how would I find the midpoint, Hayden?
Add -5 and 0 and divide by 2.
So you get what?
-2.
Which again makes sense because this is 2 away and this is 2 away, so they have the even amount on both sides. That's what makes it a midpoint, is it's an even amount on both sides. Okay, Rob, what are my points for B and E? Okay, so how would I find the middle of those? Okay, good. And then, yeah, you get 1 over 2, which is 1/2. Which, again, B and E, let's see here. So that's 1, whoops, I want a different color here. 1, 2.5. 1, 2.5. So do you see how they're both 2.5 away from that halfway point there? So that's midpoint. It's right in the center. So before we move on to a coordinate plane, so an ordered pair, go ahead and finish writing that down and see what questions do you have for me. What questions do you have for me? Make sure everything's ready. All right, so finding the midpoint in the coordinate plane. So a coordinate plane is just a graph, essentially, with an x and a y. So in the coordinate plane, the midpoint of a segment can be found using a formula. So the midpoint M of x comma y of the line segment with endpoints x1, y1, and x2, y2 is this. So what you're doing here to find the midpoint is you're finding the average of the x values and the average of the y values. So you look at the x's and the y's separate to find the midpoint. So everybody got that? So you'll add the x values together and the y values together separately, and that gives you the midpoint, which gets you to this ordered pair up here. x1 plus y, x2 divided by 2 gives you the x coordinate. y1 plus y2 gives you the y coordinate, okay? And that gets you that ordered pair. So do not mix x's and y's. So my big note for you guys here is do not mix x's and y's. They are not like. So we're going to practice using the midpoint formula to prove that M is located at 1, 1. So we need the ordered pair for A and the ordered pair for B. So Jill, what's the ordered pair for A?
Negative 1, 3.
Be careful. Negative 1. 3 isn't wrong. What did you forget?
Oh, negative.
There you go. And Logan, what's the ordered pair for B?
3, 5.
Okay, so we have our x1, y1, x2, y2. Before we go to find the midpoint, does it really matter what order you add the x values together or the y values together? Does it matter? No. Addition is commutative, which means that it doesn't matter what order you add things in. So if Harmony decides to do negative 1 plus 3 divided by 2, and Iku decides to do 3 plus negative 1 divided by 2, you should still get the same number. Does everybody understand that? All right, so we are going to find the midpoint. So you start with the x's. Let's write that here. Midpoint of x's. So Lindsay, what would I add together to find the midpoint of the x's? Okay, and what do I divide that by? So Lindsay, negative 1 plus 3 is? Over 2, which is 1. Okay, Desiree, then we're going to find the midpoint of the y's. So what are the things that I'm going to add together to find the midpoint of the y's? Negative 3 plus 5 over 2, which is what? It's negative 3 plus 5. 2 over 2, which is 1. So our x is 1. It's always x comma y. So it's 1 comma 1 for our midpoint. So look and see if that makes sense, like the process that you're going to go through to find the midpoint. If I confused any of you, please ask a question. Do not leave this room confused. That does not help you. If you're confused, there's probably somebody else in the room that's also confused. So what questions do you have for me so far? If you're ready, you can flip to the next slide then. All right, so the endpoints of CD are given. Find the coordinates of the midpoint M. So it gives you the formula up here. This is something you need to know. So remember I told you needed to know the Pythagorean theorem and you needed to know the distance formula? You also need to know the midpoint formula. Hayden, how do I find the midpoint of the x's? So add 3 plus 7 and divide it by 2. What does that give me? Which is good. Okay, Casey, how do I find the midpoint of the y's?
You add negative 5 and 9 over 2.
Negative 5 plus 9 over 2, which is what? 4 over
2.
which is
2.
what is my final answer then? What is my final answer, Olivia? So your midpoint M is at 5, 2. So I'm just putting the M in front because it tells you the midpoint is M. Okay, Ian. Second one there, midpoint of X's.
Maybe -4 plus 0.
Over.
4.
Be careful how many pieces you have. How many things are you adding together? 2, so you're dividing by?
Oh, 2.
Yeah, the average always has you divide by the number of pieces there are. So what's -4 plus 0?
Oh, -4.
Over 2, good. Which is? Good. Iku, how about the midpoint of the Y's? And it's so important what Iku just said there. She did a great job. She said 7 plus -3. Notice that she added with the sign. A lot of kids lose the signs. Do not lose the sign. So what do you get when you do 7 plus -3?
4 over 2.
Which is?
2.
Katie, what's my answer then? -2, 2. Might need a calculator for the next one as it has decimal points. Kylie, how do I find the midpoint of the X's? It's -5.1. Just don't lose that decimal. Plus 1.4. That's fine. And what do I divide that by?
2.
Good. So go ahead and put that in your calculator. Like when you divided the whole entire, did you divide by 2 as well?
Yeah.
Okay, how did you type, let me just make sure you typed it in your calculator, right? That's okay. So first add the top together and hit equals. You can't hit the divide by 2 right away, guys. So make sure you do the top and then hit divide by 2. So do,
Yeah, and then I got,
okay, so that's -3.7, okay.
and then I divided by 2.
Perfect.
And it was 1.85
Perfect.
negative.
Just want to make sure you guys realize that. So you must do the top first. Hit equals. Then divide by 2. Okay? Just so you guys understand how to use your calculators for it. Emma. Midpoint of Y's. Okay? Which is then what? 0.15. So Hayden, what's my final answer then? right, look at that before we move on to the next side and see what questions you guys have for me. If you got something wrong, let me know. All right. What if you're given the midpoint and one endpoint and you have to find the other endpoint? So let's think about this for a second. So if we know, I'm going to do the x's number line. If we know that an endpoint is at 1 here and the midpoint is at 2, how could we find the other endpoint? What could we do to find the other endpoint? So this is not mathematically. This is more like visually seeing it first. I'll show you guys the math behind it too. Would have to be on the other side of what? The E or the M? The M. And how many more does it have to go? How many is it from the first E to the M? 1. So how many do we have to go to the right? 1 more. So where is our other endpoint? It's not at 1. It's at, where is it at? 3. So we have our other endpoint is at 3. Mathematically, how would this look? Well, we know to find the midpoint, you do x1 plus x2 over 2. We know that's your midpoint right there, right? So we know the midpoint. So we plug in 2 there. We know x1 is 1. And we divide by 2. And we're trying to figure out what x2 is. I'm showing you 2 different ways because mathematically some of you will get really confused. Others of you will like to just graph it out and see it that way. So it just kind of depends on who you are and what you need. Are you okay? Okay. Do you understand how I plugged into that formula? Do you see how it matches the formula from the previous slide at the top? Do you got that or no? Are you confused?
I'm not confused. I just think I know.
You know what to do?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Does anybody confuse that just this first step here, getting it plugged in here? Do we all understand where this came from? Okay. So what's the first step that I need to do to solve for x? What's the first step I have to do to solve for x? What do I have to do first, Ian? Multiply by what?
2.
We have to multiply by 2 on both sides, get rid of that denominator. And then I can just subtract 1. Did we get 3 either way? Did we get 3 either way? So does it matter which way you do it? No. Okay, so then let's look at it, the y's real quick. So y's is I'm going to go up and down because it's a vertical number line, right?
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
So we have a point at 4. And that is our endpoint. And we have a point at 1. And that is our midpoint. How can I go about finding my other endpoint then? What can I do to find my other endpoint? What can I do? Think about what we just did on the last one. Go 3 the other way. So why did you choose the number 3?
That's how far 4 is.
Yeah, and the endpoint to the midpoint is 3, so we need to keep 3 in the middle. So do we have to go down or up 3? Down 3. So if we go down 3, we're at 0, -1, -2 for our other endpoint. Mathematically speaking, if you look at your previous slide, you know that you have to add the 2 y's together and divide by 2. So if you do that mathematically, the midpoint for y y1 plus y2 over 2. Oops, I did, yeah. And that's your midpoint for y. So in this case, we have 1 equals 4 plus y sub 2 over 2. Again, do I care if you use a number line? If that's how you have to figure it out, do I care? Do I care if you do it mathematically? No, all I care about is you understand what you're trying to find, and you find it the way that makes sense to you. So I multiply by 2 on both sides. So I get 2 equals 4 plus y sub 2. Subtract 4. And I get y sub 2 equals negative 2. Did we get the same thing both times? Okay, so what's my answer then? What's my other endpoint? How do I write that up as an answer? Austin, how do I write that up as an answer? 3, negative 2. Very good. Okay, that's kind of confusing for a lot of students, so look at that and see what questions you have for me. All right, so let's look at the next one here. If I'm looking at the x's, I have an endpoint here and a midpoint here. So how many are there from the endpoint to the midpoint? How many spaces is that? Cameron, how many spaces is that from the endpoint to the midpoint of the x's? Be careful. You go 2 here, then another 8, which is 2 here. And then I go another 8, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So remember, when they're on opposite sides, you essentially just add them together. So where is my other endpoint going to end up? Where is my other endpoint going to end up if we have to go 10 spaces away? Where is my other endpoint going to end up, Hunter? 18, because that's 10 away from 8, right? So that's for the x's. I'm just going to do it this way on this one here. You guys do know how to do it mathematically. I showed you that. Oops, wrong one. Okay, the y's. I have a midpoint at 0. Okay, and the midpoint at 0. What is the spacing between the midpoint and the endpoint? What is the spacing between the midpoint and the endpoint, Rob? 9. So we want the midpoint to be in the middle, so we always go from the midpoint. So we have to go 9 down from there. So, Jill, where would I be then for the y's?
9.
What?
9.
Be careful. You're going down, you're at, there you go. So what is my final answer then when I go to write this up, Carmichael? It's not 9, but
-9.
there you go. All right, I'm not going to do the back slide with you guys.